Hey everyone, I'm Don Purdom at the Conservative Era, and I am here today with my good friend Larry, who is center left. I wouldn't say, Larry, you're really to the extreme left. Would you agree with my assessment?
I think I'm close. Center left, yes, and really closer to the center.
Really? Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say you've definitely been making inroads in that direction over the last couple of years that I've known you. I really want to spell out here that Larry and I are good friends, and some people may take a position that myself or Larry maybe is getting passionate about an issue, and the other responds in a way that may be passionate, and it could come across sometimes that Larry and I are really, going at it here. And the fact of it is that we're not. Larry and I are really good friends. We met over social media about two and a half years ago. We built a fantastic online relationship together, even though we don't live that far apart. I mean, you're in the Philadelphia area. I'm in Lakester, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half apart. And I just want everybody to know that we're going to have a really interesting conversation today. And I think that this could get passionate for us both, but I want everyone to know at the end of this, Larry and I deeply respect one another and value each other's thoughts and opinions and differences. I don't know, would you like to make a quick contribution on that, Larry?
Sure. I think our viewers might be able to see our rapport online, kind of like on the Five. You can see Juan Williams, Jesse, and Greg. We're all friends despite their spirited debates. Where I think that might not come across as well is online. We are friends, and I know I can talk to you in a way, and I know you'll see me behind the keyboard, and I know when you won't take offense. But other people and I want to recommend, and if you don't mind me pitching your platform, the Conservative Era, or the Conservative. You changed the name just recently.
That's correct.
Did I say right?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That it's great to have online debate, and your platform is a great place to do it, but we can't pick up tone on the social media. And so I want to make the point that when you're talking, we know each other's tone, and we know the person behind the message, but we don't know that on online. And but when Don and I are communicating, we don't have to necessarily premise stuff because we know we understand each other.
Yeah.
And the intent behind the message.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into today's topic, because again, I think this is something that a lot of people are really passionate about, and especially conservatives. And I know liberals are as well. I know that they have their own worldview. Of course, I'm going to argue that they're wrong, but that's okay. That's what we're here to do today. So let's talk about disinformation. And let's talk about Joe Biden's new Disinformation Governance Board that I like to refer to as an Orwellian Ministry of Truth. This whole conversation is really interesting to me, because we have gone through 5 years of debate in this country about disinformation, and most of it has been driven, if not all of it, on the left. And Larry, before I really get into my view on this, I'd like to hear some of the moderate left's perspective on what Biden's doing here.
Okay. And Don, this is why I love communicating with you on these political issues, because when you pick a news comment or headline out of the media and then respond to it, I largely agree with you as stated. You make almost always, again, mostly good points, well supported, and I can't necessarily dispute it as you write it or as you convey it. My problem is the narrative that you start with. To me, the narrative is not President Biden's disinformation campaign. Now, it's to be discussed, and I have complete faith in you. You'll discuss it intelligently. But the narrative is disinformation and misinformation. You start there. Then you discuss whether Biden is inappropriate or appropriate. And I almost defer to you because you point out things that I don't necessarily see. But to discuss Biden and his effort to correct the problem without starting with the problem, to me, can be incomplete, is incomplete.
So Larry, let's start with that. You bring up a really great point. where did disinformation start? Why are the Democrats so heavily angling in this direction of trying to control speech through disinformation?
So it started before, but for the purposes of this discussion, because I know it'll lead us in an interesting place, let's start with what in liberal circles they call the big lie about the Great Steal. They're, according to the Supreme Court and including to a substantial majority of Republican election officials, there was no significant or material irregularity, and we had a secure election in 2020. Yet, I would like to say that it was only Trump's narrative because he started the lie, except that it was bought by a substantial portion of lawmakers, so that you have disinformation. This is not a media disinformation. This is disinformation by elected officials for partisan power and a partisan narrative. I am not disparaging or blaming the officials for starting it, but my gosh, to help promote and further the big lie and to avoid responsibility by saying, wait a minute, I'm just for election integrity, when you are voting and promoting a bill to decertify a legitimate, challenged election, then I believe that's where I would begin the misinformation. Then we could also go back and see where the media does it or where it happens online as well.
Well, Larry, here's my point of view on this. I am absolutely convinced that disinformation is being defined now, by my point of view, as anything Democrats don't like. If Democrats don't like something, it's disinformation. We got to root it out. We got to get it off of social media. We got to get it out of the press. We've got to root out anything we don't agree with. And let's think about this for just a second. You know, the new head of this disinformation governance board, she's a cheap purveyor of disinformation herself. She went out there and she championed the Steele dossier, which is proven by the government's own resources to be a completely fake and erroneous document. She's been out there stating that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. Really? Come on, Larry, let's think about this for a second. We're going to put hardcore partisans in control of a board that doesn't even acknowledge their own disinformation. I mean, let's think about this.
I don't want to interrupt unless it's
no, that's okay. Let's think about it for a second.
I want you to get everything out first.
Yeah. I mean, but let's think about it for a second. Our esteemed Democratic friends have told us that the border's closed while lying about it, and our eyes are wide open to see what's going on the southern border. Is that disinformation? Are they going to monitor themselves and correct their own disinformation? What about labeling common sense election reforms as racist? Are they going to correct their own disinformation through this board? What about promoting Russia collusion that didn't exist? Are they going to correct their own disinformation on that? Or alleging parents were domestic terrorists last year? Well, there is so much disinformation on the left. They're so focused on what you talked about with the big lie that all of their big lies keep adding up one after another, creating a narrative that's not accurate and doesn't exist. And so I just want to know why creating a board like this is beneficial. What about Antifa violence? They didn't seem to be going after Antifa very hard when they were going after federal buildings. Matter of fact, all these district attorneys—
that's not disinformation now. Hold on.
Loose.
Stay on the topic.
No, but I want you to see they didn't. They created disinformation through that by giving the impression that Antifa was just exercising their First Amendment rights. What about BLM riots in urban communities where they just ransacked and destroyed stuff? Did they go on social media and try to create or try to put out the disinformation or the misinformation about what was really going on? No, they
I think we
didn't do
saw
any
it
of that.
with our own eyes. I don't think that I look at that as different than disinformation, but please continue.
Or misinformation,
Oh,
whatever you
either
want.
way,
I'm talking about on social media. There were things being propagated across social media amongst those groups that helped fuel those riots. And not one Democrat stood up and said, stop doing that. This is not the truth behind why you're motivated to do this. What about the couple in St. Louis, as BLM people were marching on their private property and they held guns legally to tell them, if you mess with our property, we're going to have a problem. And the media spun a disinformation campaign about their legal rights to try to create a narrative that wasn't true. So we could do this all day long, Larry, because my concern is that government should not be the purveyor of deciding what is disinformation and misinformation when Democratic partisans are the ones driving all these narratives. That's my view.
Okay. Wanted to make sure that you
Rant's
cleared,
over.
got everything off your plate, off your chest. So I would say that this would be a far more interesting discussion that we should have first before we talk about before outrage comes in about what Biden is doing. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, to talk about, I think this discussion needs to happen first. And then we can discuss what a better way to proceed would be to combat disinformation, because so much, like you just pointed out, so much of disinformation is partisan language that's not necessarily an expression of fact, but communication that's being made to persuade people to join a political party or ideology. And how sad it is that the mainstream media promotes one side or the other, because I believe Fox News and Newsmax, and I believe they all could be called mainstream soon at this point. I think anything on cable television, if you are on a cable television that comes free to anyone, you're mainstream. So you have a group that promotes one party and a group that promotes the other. And when they say something, we all now have to recognize that it's actually partisan language, not news. And I think that we don't start there, Don. And if we started there, we all, as people, as not partisans, but people want good government, will start their discussion by saying, like you and I just did, here's what the left is upset about. And here's what the right is upset about. They both do it. How do we correct it? But if you or me start by saying, let me tell you what's going on, and I list partisan grievances, you just listed the left, the right, or grievances against the left by the right. I just listed a grievance by the left against the right. To me, you had the most credibility during election season in 2020, during the summer, when you started almost every article that way. I don't know if you remember when you were doing that. I do, because that's when we met, or that's when we got closer, because you said, all right, I want to put this fairly. If you didn't say it like that, your intent was so clear. Here's what I say, and here's what the left would say. Let me acknowledge that. Then when someone starts speech that way or starts to make a message that way, you will have any listener in the palm of your hand, consuming your content and listening to you. So I encourage you to start a misinformation campaign, not with just grievances from the right, but both. And then say, now let me tell you a lousy idea of what the Biden administration is doing. And guess what, Don? Like always, I'm eating out of the palm of your hand. When you say this is why a partisan organization shouldn't do this, but when you say, I bleed red. And let me tell you something really bad about Biden. You turn me off and I stop listening. I want to tell you, wait, let's start this way. That is my point and my response to your article and your opening. The floor is yours.
Larry, I appreciate the point of view, as always, but in this instance, I guess I really want to make the point that it's not Republicans that are out there screaming about misinformation or disinformation. I found the irony in the announcement of this disinformation board just a few days after Elon Musk declared he's buying Twitter for $44 billion and saying he's going to turn it into a free speech platform and go back to make it a private entity. I don't think there are accidents in terms of what politicians do and partisans do, and in particular, this White House. Now, there wasn't with Trump either, so I'm not saying that. But what I would say is I really question why this is needed. Did you know that the federal government already has an entity that this is supposed to be their job, that this isn't even needed? I found this on the US government website. So there's an office that's dedicated to combating disinformation. It's called the Global Engagement Center at the Department of State. Now, Mayorkas went on the news this weekend, and he admitted that, and for those of you who don't know, Alejandro Mayorkas is the secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who has created this governing board on disinformation, what I like to call the Ministry of Truth. So that is meant to be pure sarcasm, 100%.
Anyway, I thought you were I thought it was their words, but keep going.
No. So anyway, this Global Engagement Center at the Department of State, its mission says this: to recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts aimed at undermining or influencing the policy, security, or stability of the United States, its allies, and partner nations. It already exists. It's been there for almost 2 decades. Matter of fact, I think this was created during the George Bush administration. And so the question I have is, if that's what Mayorkas says they're doing is trying to prevent violence, well, who is the decider, the arbiter of what information creates violence? Because as I tried to say a moment ago, they didn't seem all that concerned about it when it was Antifa and BLM people that were committing violence. And they still don't seem to be. Their argument seems to always be centered against conservatives or Republicans. And it's baffling to me.
So let me ask you this. What media response about BLM and Antifa perpetuated and created a violent situation?
Well, on social media, there were instances of people communicating, Antifa people, about, hey, we're going to be here at this time engaging in this activity. Come join us as we fight against the tyranny of republicanism. Well, what tyranny would you be talking about in Portland, Oregon, that's completely run by left-wing Democrats?
Okay, so look, that is definitely the kind of story that may be, you might get on conservative media, but I didn't hear in the mainstream media, and hopefully
Larry,
someone in the
comments. You hear nothing in mainstream media.
You heard nothing.
These guys are left-wing partisans.
Okay. Oh, look, hold on. I agree that we have a problem. And I think I agree that, you put more thought into it. And usually when you put more thought, when you do your research and you criticize something, usually you're on point. So I know not to argue that with you unless I'm going to do my same research. So I acknowledge your point.
Well, I think here's the broader question. And this is really something I'd like to hear your perspective on. And don't tell me that you agree with me. What I really want to understand is...
Hold on. I only agree with a limited point. I disagree with your approach.
Okay.
On how to create better government. Now,
so is it the government's responsibility Let me think about how I want to word this for a second. Does the US Constitution give the government the responsibility to decide what is a fact and what is not a fact, what is information and what is misinformation or disinformation? And does it give the government the responsibility to engage in those political discussions and shut down opposing points of view?
No, I think that you made I think you made a very careful or used the proper wording when you said who should be deciding when free speech makes us unsafe. And that's what the government is going to purport, and that's how they're going to phrase what they're trying to do to weigh in there. And I'm sure your point is that they overreach and they're going too far when we have partisans. We just pointed out how each side is complaining about what the other side says. So we've established that there's an enormous amount of very damage-destructing partisan speech coming from governments and mainstream media outlets. I'm looping conservative media into mainstream, and I understand we have to define our terms because that's ambiguous right now. Sometimes I said mainstream media, and someone yelled at me for including Fox. Fox isn't mainstream. I was, well, look, main media, however we want to put it. So I do agree. Well, I guess my point is that's a good discussion to have. That no, I do see overreach. It's the Biden administration and all his partisans trying to say we're going to do it. I can see why you're upset. I get it.
Well, what do you think if it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court when lawsuits begin flying about this Disinformation Governance Board? Where do you think that the Supreme Court is likely to land on this issue? You're an attorney, so you've kind of learned at a minimum, basic constitutional rules and principles and whatnot, and separation of powers and all of this wonderful and unique and crazy, fun-loving stuff. What do you think is liable to happen?
The best way for me to answer that is to say that if the Trump administration was up in arms about a quote unquote big lie or election fraud because a key Senate seat in his midterms, he went against him and social media played a big role. So Donald Trump announced, I am going to start a disinformation body. Oh, the Democratic scholars would be screaming just like you are. In that phrase, with that context, I would hope that such a board would not be set up as a partisan body or a government body run by partisans.
If any Republican came out and said anything like what you just said, I would be right there standing next to you screaming about this just as I am right now, because this is a principle of American republicanism rooted in the Constitution where I'm concerned. And if this is not a party issue, this is genuinely not a party issue for me. If anyone out there is claiming that the government has the solution to the problem and that they need to enact boards to go out and control people's political speech, I've got a problem.
Yeah, you do.
I've got a serious problem. And even if because there is enough information out there for the public to gather when somebody's trying to pull a rue on us. It's out there. We're going to find out tonight, prospectively, how much power Donald Trump still has in the Republican Party in an Ohio primary. We're going to find out tonight. We're going to find out next week in Pennsylvania and in some other states. So if Trump is out there creating disinformation, I'm going to be the first one out there calling it out, just like I am in Pennsylvania with some of our Republican senators who voted for Act 77 that created the mail-in ballot no excuse program, and then turned around last year and cried wolf after what they didn't like happened in the election. I've got a problem with every Republican who passed that bill and then went out there and tried to claim that they're going to solve the problem that they created.
So then how do I mean?
That is their misinformation. That is their disinformation to go out there and pass a bill and then say, I'm against what I did.
Did I put it fairly that the Democrats have a concern about Republican legislative behavior following Trump's quote unquote big lie? Does that belong in the discussion?
I think from the left's point of view, it does. I can understand how they riled people up from that angle. I can understand why anti-Trump people feel that way, because that's they've been taught for 4 years.
Then let me say, from the left, I have a problem with everything that you said was left disinformation. And you're just saying from the left, everything you said, I have a problem with, both from the left and the right. I'm asking you as a person, as an American, someone who wants good government, do both belong in the same discussion?
They belong in the discussion because we all have the right to have the discussion. Absolutely. It doesn't mean that one side clearly has to be right and another side has to be wrong. And it's the job of good communicators to make their case why and then go with it.
Hold on. Why does one side have to be? Wait, you said one side doesn't have to be right and wrong? Is that what you said?
No, one side has got to be right. One side's got to be wrong.
Oh.
It's up to each individual on each side of that discussion to make their case, to make their persuasive argument why they're right and why the other side's wrong. And then when they're proven to be wrong, to acknowledge that they have been persuaded in that direction.
Oh, all right. So
you're a good attorney.
Find you avoiding a question. I am asking you, can you see why members on the left, and again, Don, I have to say, not members of the left, can you see why Americans would be concerned about misinformation because of the efforts to decertify the election based upon Trump's lies?
You're asking a really complicated question.
All right, that's okay.
All right, and okay. I'll answer it if you'll allow me to answer it concisely and shortly without all the detail.
All right, you need to because we're out of time. So go ahead. Let's finish on your point, please. I want to hear it.
So what I would say is there is evidence, and I've given it to you here in the state of Pennsylvania, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania alone, that there was indeed issues with voter fraud. The question is not whether there was voter fraud. There's no doubt that it existed. It's been proven in legal circles. The question is, was there enough to overturn the election? And so did Trump do anything that was unique in political history? No, there have been presidents who alleged that there was fraud and that there was misgivings against them. I think Teddy Roosevelt was one of them, if I remember right. So the question is that you're asking me is, did Trump have a right to political speech to express a view that was inflammatory? That's really what you're asking.
No, my question is, was it not disinformation to say
no,
that there was theft, there was material fraud that he had evidence of, but chooses not to show? That's what he said, that required required patriots to fight. Otherwise, a steal occurred. Don, that's the issue. You couch it very like from what a reasonable person saw or did, but that's not what happened. Or I take issue with the reporting that I read, but that's not what happened.
Yeah, and see, I would take issue with the reporting that you read as well, because I think that it did not go well, and it did not take into consideration all these other factors. For example, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, I believe. In Lehigh Valley, they caught people with hundreds of ballots, slipping them in to the ballot boxes. And those people are going to be prosecuted under the law. But after an election is already deemed to be won and it's over in the heat of the moment without saying, and really what many Republicans were saying on January 6th is, can we take a pause for 2 weeks to make sure that beyond a shadow of a doubt, there is no question about the integrity of the election? That's what was being asked on January 6th. Now, where you and I will agree is that those individuals that went into the Capitol building, That's embarrassing. It was egregious. It was wrong. They should be prosecuted if they broke the law. But to turn it into an insurrection, I think was language too far. That's my opinion.
I was never outraged by the misbehavior by the people who went into the building. Was never as outraged by that as I was by President Trump's behavior. Everyone wants to say how outrageous these criminals destroyed the Capitol. Trump was the primary mover in that whole narrative. So we don't agree on this part. Because for you to suggest their behavior in doing that on their own was material, no. Emotional people during emotional times follow the loudest, most persuasive voice, and what they did was completely predictable and not outrageous. The outrage was on Trump and anyone who supported that behavior, and that's my take.
Yeah.
I want to be clear on that.
And I think there was just in that moment in time, for a variety of reasons, in the middle of all these things going on in numerous states with pandemic rules, and again, I think that there was an incredible amount of pent-up frustration that sat there. And do I think that Trump tapped into that? I do. Do I think he was right to do it? Probably not. Do I think that Pence handled himself the right way? I absolutely do. I think in all of this, and I've said this for years, one of the men that I most admire the most is Mike Pence. Because I'm a person of faith. He's a person of faith.
I gained respect for him as well. I want to join that.
And he will do what he thinks is the principal right thing to do. And I think what he did on that day was the correct thing.
Where we agree.
All right. So I think that we dumb January 6th down and Trump's role in that. I think that I don't think we're not giving the conversation enough justice because of the complexity that was behind it. And that's where my challenge is in that particular conversation.
I want to suggest to you that would be a good show. I believe historians will be talking about this for quite some time. So I don't believe it's beating a dead horse. I believe it deserves a discussion. But Don, here's my other thought, is that we're out of time and we should leave it there and pick this up next week.
I'm looking forward to it, Larry. As always, I appreciate the inspiring, passionate conversation.
I as well. Thanks, Don. Have a good week.
You as well.